We go. There we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our series on Journey Through the Heart of Grieving. So today we have Christina Murt, who is amazing and has so much to offer in experience, her passion being end-of-life care, and as a nurse for 37 years, and a soul midwife, which might be a new term to some of you, but I think that's wonderful. And a complementary therapist as well. So hello, Tina. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thank you
So
for inviting me here.
I would just love to know more about Soul Midwife. What does that mean?
Soul Midwife is a term that a very, very beautiful woman called Felicity Warner has brought forward in the last few years. She's been working for the last 20 years in end of life care. And she's kind of the mother of all soul midwives, and she's just the most beautiful soul. So, a soul midwife is a non-religious, non-clinical person who has a longing to be with someone at the end of life to make sure that they have everything they need, that all of their kind of spiritual needs, their emotional needs, their physical needs are cared for, but not in a clinical way. So it kind of complements the clinical system. And as a nurse, as you said, of 37 years, it sits beside everything that the kind of clinicians do to just enhance that journey because it's a very, very important journey. And I have been passionate about end of life for the whole of my career. I actually worked in a nursing home when I was 15. And that is the first time I actually sat with someone who was dying,
Mm.
a beautiful lady called Rosie. And it just felt like the most natural thing in the world to me to sit with her as she was dying. I wasn't frightened. I didn't feel uncomfortable in any way. I just sat with her, and it was such a privilege to be with her as she died. And I'm not going to use any other word other than death and died because we use so many terms, don't we, in
Yes.
in our society. Um, so although it's quite blunt, if you like, to use those words, that is what we're talking about. We are talking about someone dying and death. And it is not to upset anyone or to push it into people's faces. It's just so that we can have, as a communities, open and honest conversations around death because we just don't, Maryellen, do we?
Yeah,
We
I know.
don't
It's a
have
big thing.
those.
It's
Yeah,
interesting actually, because this week with Sadie, having been bit by the snake, um, we didn't know if she was going to make it at one
yeah,
point, and it
yeah,
was really frightening for the kids. And that
yes,
would have been the first death that would have been really close to them because I mean they've lost their grandparents, but that was during COVID and that was during a time where we weren't allowed to travel, we weren't allowed to attend funerals. So I think sometimes in a child's mind they just kind of think, well, they're still just in another country,
yes,
but they're not, you know. So it's kind of compartmentalized it a little bit, but it really was kind of very full on. So you know, it's there's so much emotion surrounding it because we don't. And aside, like if you don't have animals in the house or you don't live on a farm where death happens and it's a natural part of life.
yeah,
And, you know, for some people, especially when it's in the younger ages, it feels completely unnatural to lose a child before a parent,
yes.
for example, you know. So there's a lot of things that just aren't easy, you know. And so because death isn't part of our culture, it's all about how long can we make people live and what's the new youth serum to take 20 years off you or make you, you know, let's go trim your genes with the CRISPR techniques and see if we can just make you live to 300, you know.
Yes, and
Mm.
so as you say very rightly, um, death isn't something that is a comfortable conversation in in our communities, and you know the thing is, our body knows how to die. It knows what it's doing. It's like with birth. the baby comes, the mum's body knows what to do, the baby comes, the baby knows what to do. Our bodies know what to do. And yes, sometimes we do need help from clinicians if we have pain or we're incredibly restless or anxious. But what soul midwifery does is sit beside someone through the whole journey. And it isn't necessarily that a soul midwife would be with someone as they were dying. You and I can talk about this. You and I can talk about the things that we might bring up, like advanced care planning. What is it that you would like at the end of your life as you journey towards death? What is it that you would like to be in your life? Who would you like to be in your life? How would you like it to look? Would you like to, be in a field, in a bed? Would you like to be in the hospice? What is it that you would feel comfortable and safe with at the end of your life? So what my passion is that death become a normalized part of living. That is my passion. And if I think about it, if you want to use another word for a soul midwife, it could be a death doula or a sacred death companion. There are lots of different words. And what I recognize is that I have been all of those things all of my life without having a name for it.
Yeah.
I have obviously sat with hundreds of people at the end of their life. I have sat with young people and old people and middle-aged people. And again, it has always felt incredibly normal to me. And that is, I know I can't, magic that up for everybody. I know that it's uncomfortable to some people and they don't know what to do. But the soul midwife's role is to sit within that for the person and their family and their loved ones so they can have open conversations, so that it can help with fear, anxiety, putting things in place that you want to happen as you journey onwards, so that there's a lot of kind of things, there's a lot of layers to death. It's not just about a clinical model.
Yeah,
and
I suppose
and
for
I
family too, it's a big thing because some families know it's going to happen and they're
yes,
helping people through the journey, and then other
yes,
families, it's a shock, like a car
yes,
accident or a
yes,
sudden heart attack or a stroke or those kind of things, or even some of the more lately the kind of cancers that are happening at the minute, and it's a shock. So I imagine you
it,
being there to help them and basically really hold space and
mm,
hold that life in a container in a
mm,
way that matters, that they feel that their person has been honored.
absolutely. And that is the you've
Mhm.
you've put it in a nutshell, Maryellen. It's about being present, fully present with the person, in that holding a space where they can feel heard and
Yeah.
seen, because very often and it sounds like I'm bashing the clinical model. I'm absolutely not. I have been within the clinical model all of my life, and I know that I have helped hundreds and hundreds of people at the end of their life. I'm certainly not, bashing anything about the clinical model. But what I recognize and have had the privilege to be able to do is hold a different kind of presence through my clinical career. I have been able to hold the presence of the space for that person. And I have had so many people say to me, I feel so safe around you. I feel so comfortable. I feel I don't have any anxiety or fear when you're sitting with me. I don't know what that transference is. I don't know what it's called, or,
Yeah.
but
I think it's
me
called
being,
coherence.
is that the word for
I
it?
think that's the word.
I think me feeling comfortable in that space
Hmm.
allows other people to feel comfortable in that space. That,
Coherence.
yes, thank you. I've never heard that before, so that's wonderful to have a word for it. Mm. So as I said, there are so many layers to death. And what I do, particularly as a soul midwife, and I have very many hats, as you said, nurse, complementary therapist, mentor, soul midwife, all of those things. Um, but basically, what I have done is moved into my crone years, okay, sitting fully in all of the wisdom and the knowledge that
Yeah.
I have gained over all of my lifetime. And I am able then to sit with people with confidence. I can't answer every single question for everybody, but I'll have a good go. And if I can't, I'll find out. It's not just about holding that space in a container on your own. We refer people on. You were talking about people losing, um, young ones
Mm.
or teenagers and there are so many wonderful um, charities out there, services that you can refer on to. So I can't do everything. I'm very aware that I can't do everything. I will do everything that I can, but then I am fully aware of all of the other resources that are there so that I can refer someone on. And I would happily, speak to GPs, consultants, nurses, or carers, all of those people as a soul midwife. And not just because of my background, but that is what we're encouraged to do as soul midwives, to advocate for people. I was saying earlier about would you like to be in a field, in a bed? At the end of your life. You know, it
Yeah.
might not be possible, but it might be that you could advocate for that just for a couple of hours, if that's what you long for, to be outside, you know? So there are so many beautiful kind of things that you can bring in as a soul midwife.
Mhm.
Um, and I was lucky enough to work within the district nursing service for the last 6 years of my career in Penwith and Kerrier. And a lot of my colleagues were so open to this.
Mm.
They allowed me to kind of pass on my knowledge and wisdom to them. And that is what Anna and I, we co-facilitate a course called Tender Loving Care for NODAC, No One Dies Alone Cornwall. And we have worked with the NHS and we work with the general public, and we literally want to just get as many people talking about death and feeling comfortable.
Mm.
It's about that feeling like it's just a natural part of life. It's not something to be afraid of. I mean, I love this saying by Woody Allen. I'm not afraid to die. I just don't want to be there when it happens. I love
That's
that
fair.
because that is it, isn't it? In a nutshell, that's it. I'm going to be frightened of some things as I come towards my death, if I'm aware of it, if I'm not, but we all have fears around death. We all have questions unanswered, and we can't always answer those questions, but we can sit in presence and hear someone to validate them, to validate those fears, and to let them feel heard and seen, as I said earlier. Mm.
Yeah, that's a big thing. That is a really big thing. And yeah,
Mm.
it's interesting because I mean, when we think of end of life care, we're always thinking about people in their later years, and but I think in the more recent times we see a lot of, 20 to 40s and then some of the younger ones as well, which it's a big thing because it's a natural part of life and our own soul energy as to when our time is because none of us really know.
No.
Um, so when it comes unexpectedly young,
Mm.
that's a big trip for parents and for family members and partners and all that kind of stuff. So it's how do you work with families that are in that position?
I have, and not as a soul midwife.
Hmm.
Um, I have in my career worked with families with very young people. Uh, I think the youngest I because of course I'm an adult nurse. I'm not a pediatric nurse, so I am an adult nurse, and so people come to us from the age of 16 to 18.
Mm,
So I haven't actually cared for anyone younger than that.
yeah.
But I have had the privilege of being with a family when their child has been on that dying journey. Um, and and it was a privilege. It was an absolute privilege. But as you say, it's the the most devastating journey because no one ever expects their child to die before they do.
Mhm.
And that doesn't matter how old you are, by the way,
Yeah, true.
even if you're 90
True.
and your child is 70. But as you say, from a very from the perspective of what you're experiencing right now, what you said you're experiencing is that younger people are,
Hmm.
um, you know, having cancer and then dying. Um, that is a very, very big journey, and that needs a lot of support from many, many different perspectives and professionals,
Hmm.
um, because that isn't something that just one service can hold.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, and especially for the family as well, because there's so much
Mm.
going on for the families that are in that position. Yeah,
Yes.
it's
And
incredible.
that's what I was saying earlier around um, people might just have the thought that just the NHS holds that, but they can't hold that whole journey. That journey goes on for a lifetime. That journey goes on for a lifetime. Um, I have been with people who have lost children 40, 50 years ago, and that journey is still ongoing.
Yeah. And I love hearing that because I think people always have a grip on, like people who are grieving that there's a timeline with it.
Mm,
And I think that I know having lost both my parents and the first little while, it was actually easier because they live in Canada and I live here. But, it hits at weird times,
mm,
and at any times. I remember standing in Sainsbury's and there was a really older lady and obviously her daughter helping her out. And the daughter was so kind.
mm,
And I just sat behind her and went, oh my gosh. And I just felt that wave of like my mom and that grief that came through at that time. And I'm just sitting in this checkout line crying. Like, oh my God. You know. So I think that the idea that, people think I should be over this by now.
mm.
And
You're
why?
absolutely.
Yeah.
You don't ever, um, in my experience, don't ever get over grief.
Mm,
We manage it better, and grief does not have any agenda. It comes at any time, in any place, in any moment, with the slightest trigger, you know. And so we do find ourselves in supermarket checkouts with tears rolling down our faces.
yeah.
I liken grief. I'm very visual, Maryellen. I kind of see things in my head, and how I liken grief, my grief journey, and other people's grief journey is like a flowing river.
Mm,
So water is the element of the emotions, and that is part of the framework we use as soul midwives. So the elements, the elements within the body, and this is how I see grief. It's like a river running along, and sometimes it gets eddied down to the side and it sits in a pool and it stagnates and it goes a bit dirty and smelly. Okay. And then suddenly there's a downpour and it all rushes out. And that's sometimes how grief hits us. Sometimes we're going down the rapids and our heads go underwater and we're bobbing up and down and we feel like we're drowning. At other times, we're just in still water, just floating along, and everything feels okay. And then suddenly you find yourself in the rapids again or in the stinky pool by the side. You know, it grief is a flowing journey. And sometimes it feels okay, and sometimes it feels overwhelming. And that is why there has to be many layers to the support of that. So we can't always go to our loved ones with our grief because we don't want them to know the
yes.
pain of it. we don't want them to know how much we're suffering. So we kind of cry ourselves to sleep at night when everyone else is asleep, or we go out on a walk, or we find ourselves, crying in a supermarket. Um, because again, we are uncomfortable around the emotions around death and dying. And
Or
this
emotions full
hasn't,
stop.
sorry,
Emotions full stop sometimes.
absolutely. This model that we have now has only really been around for the last 50 years. Okay, so the knowledge and wisdom that we held in our communities, people had their loved ones at home with an open coffin, and they would sit in vigil, and everyone would come and say goodbye. And that is really, that was happening around the wartime. And then as we've gone along and we have handed over more of our autonomy to the health service. Yeah. And again, I'm not bashing the health service. This is just the way society has gone. And we've given up so much.
Mhm.
We've given up so much of our own journey into the hands of other people, and now we expect those other people to hold that for us. But part of a soul midwife's job part of their role is to encourage us to really think about our own needs. What do I want? What does this look like for me? Not what does it look like to the nurse and the doctor and the carer, but what does it look like to me? How can I step into this fully conscious and aware? And yes, it's full of emotion and lots of different kinds of emotion. But if we can encourage people to step even slightly into that, they will feel more in control of their journey. They will feel like they have been heard and seen, as I said earlier. They will feel that it's their journey. They're not handing their journey on to someone else to control and look after.
And I think that's really important. I think what's interesting is kind of like when I hear people talk about being pregnant and then having a baby. Oh no, our lives aren't going to change. Like, oh boy, you're really in for a big shock. Because it is a massive life upheaval on so many levels. And if it doesn't get you in the first few weeks, it will get you in a couple of
Yes.
years. But with death, it's the same thing. I
Mm.
mean, when you lose somebody that you love, you don't come out the other side of that unchanged.
No,
You
it
know,
is a
it's
pivotal
massive.
moment in your life.
Yeah.
You are quite right. I lost my dad. My dad died 20 years ago from cancer. And I will tell you now, I did a pretty good job of sitting with people who were dying up until that point, or so I thought, until I experienced my dad dying. And that just opened up a whole other level. To have that experiential knowledge of the crushing grief of losing a parent. Um, and that journey took 2 years, and there were many ups and downs. But one of the most important things my dad said to me during that journey was, I just want people to treat me as if I'm normal. He said, I don't want everyone asking me what's wrong, how are you today? I just want to be I just want to be treated normally. And even though that journey for all of us was devastating, the gifts that I received from that journey have been life changing, and not only life changing for me, but life changing for other people, because I can really step into what grief feels like. I can't imagine what someone else's grief feels like, but knowing my own journey has allowed me to step deeper into someone else's. so that I
Just
can.
being in the circle with them. Yeah.
Absolutely. If you liken it to, I was making all the right noises before, and I meant them. I meant the right noises were there. The love was there. The compassion was there, and the kindness was there. But there's a depth to what I stand in now that I could never have imagined
Yeah.
before I took a personal journey that with someone that close to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think parents who've lost young children would say similar that it is a club you don't want to join,
Mm, absolutely.
because it is that depth, and grief is grief. But people experience grief for different levels and for different reasons.
Mm.
Um, but some of those experiences, grief is grief, and we understand grief, but the depth of that is pretty special.
It's bottomless.
Yes,
It's
it's
bottomless.
bottomless. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
that's a big thing, isn't it? What
Mm.
do you think, like in terms of when you're having conversations with people one to one, what are the most common things? I mean, when we've read books like The Five Most Common Regrets of the Dying and things like that,
Yeah.
are there specific things people wish for or think about or are curious about? Like interesting
Mm.
conversations or thoughts or comments that you've come across over the years that have
I
stuck
think
with you?
I think the biggest grief for people who are dying is leaving their loved ones.
Mm,
That worry about what will happen to them, how will that feel for them. So they're not really, I'm not saying they're not worried about themselves, but the most common thing I would say is that they're worried about their wife or their husband or their children, all of those things. That is something that comes up quite a lot. And I think that, what will death look like?
mm,
What will that journey look like? And of course it's different for everyone, but um there is a framework to it. As I said, your body knows how to die, and it does so in a certain sequence. And that was my last puzzle piece when I did my soul midwifery training. As I was saying, the framework that we use, which is non-clinical, and it's all around the elements earth, air, fire, and water, and how they dissolve in the body as we're dying, and how our body responds to that, and how we, as um, anyone, can support that. You know, and when you know that framework, it makes so much sense. I've been clinically watching that for all those years, and just accepting it, I suppose. But there are stages that are very, very specific. And when you know about them, it just makes it so obvious, and like, oh, this person is in the water stage, and I can support them with all of these wonderful things, you know? So for me, doing the soul midwife training with Felicity was the last puzzle piece. It was like, oh, oh, look at that. Oh, that that just makes so much sense. And I kind of knew it in my bones, but no one had ever like spoken it like that to me, you know? So it's I think that is where the tender loving care training helps, is that, and anyone can do that, by the way, you don't have to be a clinician or a carer, anybody can do that, but it gives you those stages and that framework so that you feel that you have some insider knowledge, if you like, about what death looks like. And that is, I would say, that's my biggest fear. What does my journey look like? How will it affect me? And what will it do to my body? And will I be in emotional pain? Will I be in physical pain? All of those things, they're the things people worry most about.
and it is a huge worry and huge anxiety. And also
Yeah.
for the family watching it all happen and unfold. especially when somebody is really suffering,
Mm,
because even if it's medically managed, there is still suffering, because obviously they
yeah.
can't use very high doses of things because of the respiration and the rest of it. And I think sometimes the family almost feels guilty when their loved one finally does go, because all of a sudden they're not suffering and they're
Yes.
relieved
The relief.
that they're
Yes.
not suffering. And then they feel ashamed or guilty that they feel that way. But actually,
Yes.
it's a really natural thing to not want somebody you love to suffer.
Of course. And that is one of the deepest pains that I have witnessed for family members
Mm.
is I can't, what can I do? That if I had £1 for every question, that question, what can I do? What can I do? And my answer quite often has been, there is nothing to do now.
Be.
Now we have to be.
Now we have to be.
Now we have to be. You don't have to feel guilty about not feeding your loved one, not giving them drinks, not nourishing their body. Their body's no longer able to do those things. There is nothing to do. And in our society, Maryellen, as you very well know, we're very in the doing mode. We don't feel very comfortable
Mhm.
being in presence, in the grace that is death. Because if you sit in a death space and sit in presence with death, you will feel the grace fill the room. It is beautiful. And that is why I say it's a privilege. It is such a privilege to be with someone in that part of their life. And I actually had a gentleman say to me, um, when I said that to him, there's nothing to do. You're here, you're being with your loved one. There is nothing to do, just be with them. And he actually started to cry. And he went, that is such a relief to me to know that,
Mhm.
because I want to do something, but I can't, because there is nothing that you can do. When someone is dying, there is nothing that we can do about that. There is nothing we can help their body with in the dying process. We can help them be pain free. We can make them comfortable. We can make them warm and feel safe and loved. But we can't do anything about the actual dying because we can't turn that back.
And I think it is their journey. And again, just like that whole birthing process, which you can plan for, you can do all the right things during your pregnancy, but the baby has its own way of making its way into the world.
The baby knows how to be
Baby
birthed.
knows
The body knows how to be birthed, and the body knows how
how
to
to die.
die.
Yeah.
And if we could just hold more space for that in our communities, and and that's again what No One Dies Alone Cornwall is doing. Anna runs the most beautiful companionship cafes, um, and she invites people to come, and they're a really beautifully held space. And people can come and talk about their grief, and they may be dying themselves, and they can talk about that. And it's just, have a cup of tea like we're doing, just having a chat, but being heard and seen again, you know? And then if there are any needs that need referring on or they need extra help, then it can get picked up there,
That's
you
so,
know?
what a beautiful service. That's so important because there
It
are so
really is.
many people that are alone, that don't
Yes,
have family, or the family's passed on before, or they live too far away.
yes.
Such an
And the whole kind of, this is why I'm kind of with Anna with No One Dies Alone Cornwall, because the vision is exactly what it says on the tin.
Mhm.
That we are training people to become volunteers, with other services within the NHS and other charities, so that within Cornwall, there will always be someone. We're working towards, we haven't quite made it yet, but we're working towards it, that there will be no one who has to die alone
Mhm.
if they don't want to. Some people might want to be in their own space, and we have to respect that. but they shouldn't be in their own space alone if that isn't something they want. We should all have companionship, love, care, kindness at the end of our life. We need to feel that we mattered, that our lives meant something.
That's so true.
Mm,
I did another interview with a friend of ours in Australia, and she lost her son. And the funeral director had said to her, when he goes, just wait
mm,
until you're ready. And you can just stay with him for as long as you need to. And there's no rush for us to come and collect him.
mm,
And for her, she wouldn't have ever known that was an option.
mm.
And she stayed with him side by side and washed him and loved him and kept him with her for 5 days before she was ready.
Yes, because you need that. She needed that.
So
That was her
beautiful.
journey. That was her
So
grieving
beautiful.
process. Absolutely. And like you say, that's not common knowledge. I only found this out when I did my soul midwifery training. I didn't realize that you don't you don't have to use a funeral director. You can actually put your loved one in your car, take them home. I know it sounds a bit, you can take them home and then phone the funeral director later. Okay. As long as the body is covered up, the
Mhm.
person's body is covered up, your loved one, you can drive them anywhere in the country. Now, I didn't know that.
That is amazing. I didn't know that either.
No, I absolutely didn't know that. Um, and it just shows you how much of our free will, if you like, of our your gut feeling might be like your friend with her child. She wanted to be with him for 5 days. That is what she needed. That will have been a whole body experience for her. And we all have these whole body experiences, these feelings, these longings, but we think that we have to do what the system is asking us to do. And again,
Our
it
distance
was,
from birth, isn't it? Birth and
yeah,
death, like those things that were natural when my grandparents were growing up and everybody was just in the home.
yes. And we, again, it's not something that's been there for a long time.
Mm.
It's it's a relatively new thing. For thousands of years, we have been sitting with our dying loved ones. We have been vigiling at their bedside. We have been tending to their body after death, in reverence, washing their body, being with them, holding them, people being able to come and say goodbye to them, you know, and my longing is that we open some of those sacred death practices back up again in our communities so that people don't feel like it's the domain of someone else to do those things. And I'm not talking about, forcing people to do those things, or because some people would feel very, very uncomfortable and overwhelmed in those situations. But
Mhm.
what I'm talking about is that whole body experience that you were just talking about, having the opportunity, having the opportunity
Yeah.
if you wanted to. And if you don't, that's okay. That's what all of these systems are in place for, to help you and support you in that way. But we shouldn't only have one way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
That's beautiful. Oh, I don't know what to say. Thank you. Thank you so, so much for sharing that because I know these conversations are just so important for people to
Mm.
recognize that there's more out there and that there's no rush. And we do live in that Western society where everything is done and dusted, and then I'll get on with it and then I'll grieve later. But actually, stepping through it as a
Mm.
family and then your individual journey and taking your time to
Mm.
find the new you and who you are
Yes.
after.
Yes, because as you say, it there's no normal.
Yeah.
My husband said to me when my dad died, things will never be normal again, will they?
Yeah.
And I said exactly what you said. They're not normal because
Yeah.
this is life changing. That my whole axis of my world has shifted. There is no normal
Mm.
until we move, as you say, with grief, flow with her, feel her, allow her to flow through us
Mm.
so that we then land on a new shore. And it's a different shore. And it does feel better, but not for a long time, Maryellen.
Yeah.
Not for a long time.
And that's okay.
And that is absolutely
That's
okay.
okay.
And it's a personal journey.
Yeah.
Mm,
It's a big thing. Well,
mm.
thank you so much for your time tonight. I'm so grateful for your experiences and your sharing. And I will put some of the information below in the information bit about where people
Yes.
can find out about No One Dies Alone Cornwall. And
Yes. So that's on Instagram and Facebook. And I'm on Heartswell Therapies on Facebook. Um, but I might send you, if it's okay with you, I'll send you a couple of links. Um, just for the
yeah, that
training,
would
for
be
the
really helpful.
CSE
I'll put them
training, the
underneath.
companionship cafe, and all of those things. And then people can just have a look. And if anyone needs to contact me, then they can feel free to contact me.
Yeah, brilliant. The companionship cafe is a really wonderful thing too. I really like
It really is. And Anna is hoping to get funding so she can expand that into a white, because it's in Penryn at the moment, but she's
that.
hoping to expand it into other areas as well. So
Fantastic. Right.
thank you.